Let's talk about 5 ideas for building a raised garden. Or, put differently, what material you should use to build your raised garden. I'm going to pack this video with tons of valuable information, so be sure to watch it all the way through. Now, I know a lot of you are interested in raised bed gardening, and for good reason. Most people like to grow their vegetables and herbs in raised beds because it's easier to control the soil quality, pest management, and it can be easier to harvest your bounty of veggies. Raised beds are being used more and more for decorative landscaping as well. Just look at these. No matter how you're thinking of using raised beds in your garden, this video will help you decide on what type of raised bed you want to either buy or build. And if there are some of you out there who want to try something other than the 5 materials I'm recommending here, I'll talk about some specific materials to avoid. If you're going to be an independent thinker, at least arm yourself with good info. Am I right? For those who don't know, I'm Acres Greenbed, your affable garden guru dispensing all my garden knowledge, with a little help from the internet, let's be honest, for your consumption. My goal is for you to be extremely successful with all your gardening ambitions. I want that thumb of yours to turn so green that even your hippie neighbor who spends all their time cultivating gigantic artichokes will be jealous. Yeah, just a little jealous. Let's get started with 5 ideas for building raised garden beds. Number 5. I'm not going to start with the obvious cedar or wood bed here. Let's talk about something a little outside the box. Have you ever considered using cinder blocks? No? Well, you should. And before the cinder block nerds out there protest with a quick click off or angry comment, let me clarify. The concrete blocks you can buy today at your local gigantic box store or hopefully local hardware store aren't actually cinder blocks. Cinder blocks is an antiquated term, but it's also just a general term for concrete blocks that look like this. You don't actually want to build a raised bed out of genuine cinder blocks salvaged from some old building. Those cinder blocks were made from fly ash or coal particles and contain arsenic, lead, mercury, and other heavy metals. But don't worry, if you're buying the new concrete blocks, you'll be fine. The reason modern day cinder blocks make for great raised beds is they're relatively cheap, incredibly durable, and they're modular. Cinder blocks are 8 inches tall by 8 inches wide and 16 inches long. So if you want a 16-inch tall bed, you just stack the blocks 2 high. If you want a 24-inch bed, you guessed it, add another layer of cinder blocks. You know the exact dimensions you're working with, so it makes it really easy to plan your beds. Word of advice here though, just plan well. You don't want to go through all the work of hauling in the blocks and setting them up, just to realize your raised garden bed isn't laid out the way you'd prefer. Concrete cinder blocks are incredibly durable, have a long lifespan, are inexpensive, and flexible in the shape and size of beds you can make with them. If you're considering building a raised bed, which if you're watching this video is probably a pretty good bet you are, you should at least consider this option. I've included a link in the description to a great article about how to build cinder, concrete, block raised beds. Just one caveat. If you click the link, you're required to subscribe and turn on notifications, or else it won't work. Well, actually it will still work, but I'm trying here, guys. Okay, on to number 4. Number 4. Wood. Alright, let's get the classic and obvious option out of the way with some details about using wood that you may not know. Wood is a great option for raised beds. There are a lot of ways you can go about it, and plenty of plans on the internet to do so. If you're handy with a saw, tape measure, and a drill or hammer, have at it. I've used wood in the past to build my raised beds, and it's probably the easiest DIY option. But beware, there are some things you should consider when, considering wood. First off, if you're using untreated lumber, it won't last very long, especially if you go with a cheaper option like pine. Pine is like a sponge. It'll soak up anything that it's exposed to, and that leads to quick rot and decomposition. It's cheap, but it won't last. You can, of course, add a wood preservative to make your pine's life expand. Say that 5 times fast. Just don't use chemicals that will leach into your plants, especially if you want to grow food in your raised beds, which most of you do. Linseed oil or pure tung oil are good options to extend the life of your raised bed. How long, you ask? Well, it depends on the environment, but 5 to 10 years is a safe bet. If you're interested in using wood for a raised bed, I'd advise you to use a naturally rot-resistant wood like cedar. You know what they say about cedar? Cedar, it's so great. We'll use cedar for... Okay, actually, they don't say anything special about cedar, other than it's the ideal choice for a wood-raised garden bed. You could also consider black locust or redwood, although those are less readily available, unlike cedar. If you choose a naturally rot-resistant wood, expect a 10 to 15 year lifespan. That's not too shabby, right? Okay, on to number 3. Stock tanks. Moving away from the DIY options a bit to one of our prefab options. Stock tanks are great and can be reasonably priced. If you're unfamiliar, stock tanks are used on farms to feed and water livestock. They're made of metal and require no assembly. They come in various sizes and will last a very long time. If you live in a rural area, you can usually find these at your local feed store or have them ordered in. If you live in an urban area, you're probably very confused about what a feed store is. Kidding, of course. I'm sure all of you are well aware of what a feed store is. Okay, you didn't come here for bad jokes. Let's talk about stock tanks. Although stock tanks have become rather fashionable as raised garden beds lately, there are some drawbacks. First off, they're not particularly flexible or shippable since they come as is. They're also metal, so they can get very hot in the summertime. Watch those thighs while harvesting your 6th round of tomatoes, or your legs might get a little burnt and turn just as red as your romas. I like my raised bed to have a wide top edge for sitting or placing containers on as you pick your produce, but that won't matter to many people. If you're looking for a ready-made option that requires zero assembly, stock tanks can be a great option. Just remember to drill drainage holes in the bottom. You don't want to accidentally make a veggie soup out of your raised bed after a heavy rain. Number 2. Corrugated metal. This might be the trendiest option for raised beds these days. Corrugated metal is a great option because it's nearly as flexible as wood, but should last longer. You can cut it to size and piece it together as you like. A lot of people build a wood frame and use the metal for the sides. This gives you a lot of flexibility, but it also adds some of the issues you have when building an all-wood raised bed, which is the wood will rot and decompose over time. But with this option, there's less wood to expose to the elements, which is generally a good idea. As I mentioned, corrugated metal raised beds have also become rather trendy these days. Some people like the look of them, while others don't. I suspect if you like the look of the stock tank option, you'll like the look of these as well. One cool thing about corrugated metal beds is you don't have to build your own. There are a lot of prefabricated options on the market at a wide price range. You can buy some high quality ones that will last decades, or go for a bit cheaper option, but still have that corrugated look and durability. The nice thing is most of these kits require assembly. Although I realize for many of you out there that actually sounds like a nightmare, it does allow them to be shipped rather inexpensively, and they are generally pretty easy to put together. This is the option I'm currently using for my raised beds. Oh, just remember, same rule applies to stock tanks. They get hot in the summer. Be careful. Okay, before we get to number 1 on the list, let's talk about a couple options you should never, in my opinion, use for raised beds. Pressure-treated wood, wood pallets, and railroad ties. With all of these, you run the risk of using wood with some sort of combination of toxic chemicals and pesticides. I'm not going to dig into the details here. I'll probably make another video on that subject at some point, but I'd strongly advise you to avoid these materials altogether. If you subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications, you'll be able to access the link I've provided in the description that goes into detail about these materials and why you're playing with fire trying to use them for your raised beds. The other material I'd avoid using is old tires. Upcycling is great, but personally I still think it's too risky because of the chemicals used in the process of making the tires. This is of course more of a concern if you're growing food in your raised bed. If you're just going for pretty and you think old tires are pretty, by all means, fill your yard with them. Okay, on to number 1. Number 1. Steel. Yes, I know I covered corrugated metal, but that's like comparing a Ford to a Ferrari. Both are cars, but not really in the same class. Full steel beds will be pricier than most of the other options. Not Ferrari pricey, but still more than a cinder block bed. So why steel? Well, first off, they're super durable. They can last upwards of 30 years. And the good news is that since they're becoming more and more popular, they are easier than ever to get. Years ago, if you wanted a steel raised bed, you'd have to have it custom made. That's not the case anymore. Some more positives? Steel is a heat sink and can extend your raised bed growing season into earlier spring or later fall. If you live in a wetter climate, they won't rot like your wood options. If you don't like the rusted look, be sure to build with galvanized steel. But boy, just look at these beds. They are pretty. Some other reasons you might want to consider steel is for their modern look. It's a sustainable resource, of according to the internet anyway, and it's food-safe material. If you guys want to learn more about steel raised beds, be sure to check out the article I included in the description, because you're welcome, because I'm here to spread knowledge. That's my job as the garden guru. So what do you guys think? Which option is right for you? Is there an option I missed that you'd like me to cover in future videos? Chime in the comments. As I end this video, I just wanted to give a huge shout out to Dave Lambert, the world's greatest high school horticulture teacher. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notifications, because one Garden Guru video is never enough. I'm Acres Greenbed, turning thumbs green, one video at a time, wishing everyone happy gardening.